It started with a letter, a thick envelope, yellowed at the edges, and sealed with an unfamiliar crest, a cracked candle wax emblem I didn't recognize. It arrived unannounced, addressed in a sharp, spidery hand that seemed too old for this century. I remember how my fingers trembled as I opened it, the musty scent of age and mildew rushing up from the parchment. The letter informed me of an inheritance, a sprawling, decaying estate in coastal Maine that once belonged to the Ashford lineage, a family name I had never heard of before, yet it claimed I was the last living heir. Something about it felt off, too sudden, too convenient, but I couldn't resist. I booked the earliest train. The journey was long and bleak. The farther north I went, the grayer the skies became, the more twisted the trees looked, as if they bent to whisper secrets in the cold wind. By the time I arrived in the town of Dartmouth, the sun had already retreated behind a thick layer of storm clouds. The locals stared as I passed through, some with pity, others with something closer to fear. No one greeted me. They simply nodded, eyes downcast, muttering the name Ashford, like it was cursed. When I asked for directions to the estate, a grizzled old man behind the counter at the inn simply said, "You'll know it when you see it. The forest won't let you miss it." And he was right. The Ashford house rose from the trees like a carcass of another era, its sharp gables and soot-black windows peeking through the mist. The wrought iron gate let out a groan as I pushed it open, the sound like a warning rather than a welcome. Ivy choked the facade, and ravens watched me from the roof like silent sentinels. Still, I walked forward. The key fit perfectly into the rusted lock. The door creaked open, and the air that hit me was thick with rot and something else, something sour and ancient. My foot crossed the threshold, and that's when the dreams began. The first night I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps just beyond the room. The wallpaper in the hallway peeled back in long strips, revealing strange symbols underneath, blackened shapes that resembled a language not meant for human eyes. I could swear I heard breathing behind the walls. I told myself it was just the house settling, but deep down I knew better. It wasn't just age, it was memory. The house remembered things, horrible things. In the morning, I explored cautiously. The house was massive, but time had not been kind to it. Mirrors were cracked, furniture was draped in dusty white cloths, and every hallway seemed longer than it should be. I came across a painting of the Ashford family in the foyer, an oil portrait depicting 7 members, the parents, somber and hollow-eyed. 4 children, each one oddly similar to the next, almost like duplicates, and one figure blurred beyond recognition, scratched out as if someone tried to erase it from history. I stared at that painting longer than I intended, something about it pulling at the edges of my memory. That night, the dreams came clearer. I saw a girl in a blood-stained dress, standing at the end of the hallway. Her face was expressionless, her hands outstretched. I tried to move but couldn't. She whispered something, words I didn't understand, and the walls behind her began to weep. I awoke gasping for breath, the taste of iron on my tongue. My bedroom door was ajar, though I had locked it. When I stepped outside into the hall, I saw muddy footprints leading from my door to the staircase, and then vanishing. I wasn't alone. I found the nursery on the 2nd floor. The door was sealed shut with iron nails, but something, curiosity, or perhaps something darker, compelled me to pry it open. The moment the door creaked inward, a stench of rot hit me like a slap. Inside, the air was thick, unmoving. The wallpaper was pale blue and faded, covered in faint handprints, as if children had once dragged their fingers along the walls again and again. Dolls were scattered on the floor, their faces cracked, eyes missing. In the far corner, a wooden crib sat untouched, its lace canopy drooping with cobwebs. I stepped closer and felt the temperature drop. There was something under the crib. I hesitated, then knelt down and pulled a rotting blanket aside. A small wooden box lay hidden beneath the floorboards, its lid engraved with that same unknown script I'd seen beneath the wallpaper. Inside, I found old baby teeth wrapped in strands of dark hair, some tied with faded red ribbon. I recoiled, nearly dropping the box. Who would keep such things? My hands shook as I placed it back. That night, I barricaded the nursery shut again, but the damage had been done. The house had shown me one of its secrets. I wasn't sure I wanted to know more. But it did not stop. The next morning I found the door to the nursery wide open again. The box was now on the floor in the hallway, its lid ajar, the ribbons unwound. A toy music box on a shelf began to play on its own, its melody warped and sluggish, like it was drowning in water. I remember stepping back and whispering, "Who are you?" A child's laugh echoed from somewhere deep in the walls, and in that moment, I knew something had followed me out of that room. Something young, something dead. On the third day, I discovered the study, hidden behind a false wall in the library. It reeked of ink and something more pungent, like old copper and burnt feathers. Dust covered everything, but one book lay open on the desk, a family ledger, its pages brittle and ink faded. It listed names, all Ashfords, with dates of birth and death. What chilled me was the sheer number of entries for children, dozens upon dozens. Each lived barely more than a few years, each death unexplained, but their names were neatly recorded, as though they were livestock, not sons and daughters. The last few entries were different. Some names had been crossed out violently, in red ink. Next to them were single words: returned, reclaimed, not gone. These entries were dated in the early 1700s, far too early for the kind of medical records that existed in this book. And yet, the ink felt fresh to the touch. As I read, a strange feeling crept over me, like I was being watched through the book itself. I turned to find the study door shut tight. Though I'd left it open, the air was still, heavy with dread. Something in this house was keeping records, and it hadn't stopped. That night, I heard voices again, faint, muffled, like a group of children singing a lullaby off-key. I followed the sound to the grand staircase, and that's when I saw them, small pale figures standing at the base of the stairs, their eyes black and mouths stitched shut. I screamed, stumbled backward, and hit the floor. When I looked again, they were gone, but something had been left behind. A single page torn from the ledger lay beside me. It read, "One left, one more," and beneath it, my name. There was no sleep after that. I started to hear her voice, the woman behind the walls. It began as soft sobbing, almost too faint to notice, but each night, it grew louder, more desperate. By the fifth night, it turned into wailing. The cries came from the east wing, from behind a bricked-up fireplace. I tore at the plaster until my nails bled. Behind it, I found a narrow crawl space, filled with moth-eaten clothes, broken rosaries, and skeletal remains, curled up like a child hiding from punishment. She wore a necklace. I recognized it from the painting in the foyer, the mother of the Ashford family, but her skull was cracked open, like something had been removed. Etched on the wall beside her body were scratch marks, and one word repeated dozens of times: repent. I backed away in horror. Suddenly, the space grew cold, unbearably cold. The candles I carried snuffed out in an instant, and the whispering started again, not crying now, but a voice repeating something guttural, ancient. I fled, crawling out and resealing the fireplace behind me, but I knew she wasn't trapped in there anymore. I had let her out. Later that evening, I caught sight of her in the mirror, a pale figure standing behind me, her face obscured by tangled hair, her dress soaked in shadow. I turned, but the room was empty. Still, the smell of mildew and rosewater clung to the air. I began to feel her presence everywhere, a hand brushing my shoulder, cold breath on my neck. Once, I woke to find long strands of wet hair scattered across my bedsheets. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and its matriarch had awoken. I started noticing patterns, symbols etched faintly into corners of the floor, the edges of mirrors, the baseboards of each room. They weren't random scratches, they were deliberate, ritualistic, and they all pointed to the staircase. Something pulled at me, some instinct I couldn't explain. I tapped along the lower steps until one of them gave way with a dull click. Beneath the stairs, hidden behind thick planks, I discovered a narrow stone passage that led downward into the earth. I hesitated only for a moment before lighting a lantern and stepping into the dark. The air down there was heavy, humid, and choked with dust and decay. Roots snaked through the stone ceiling, and the walls were carved with those same strange markings. After what felt like forever, I reached a chamber. Candles, long melted into puddles, ringed the perimeter. In the center was a circular pit, rimmed with black ash. Bones littered the edges, small ones, unmistakably human. Children. The walls were covered with paintings, some ancient and crude, others newer. They depicted sacrifices, offerings, a woman raising a blade over a child, a man on his knees, surrounded by shadows. My stomach turned. On the altar near the pit lay a book wrapped in stitched skin. Inside were detailed descriptions of rituals performed by the Ashford family for centuries. One passage was marked in red. To preserve the bloodline, the blood must be taken. One child, every 7 winters, returned to the Black Mother. I couldn't breathe. My hands were trembling, and then I saw it, at the very end of the book, a portrait sketch. It was me. My face, drawn decades ago. That's when I realized I was never meant to inherit this house. I was meant to end the ritual, or complete it. I tried to leave. I packed my bags in silence and made for the door, but the front door refused to open. The lock turned, but the wood wouldn't budge, as if the house itself had sealed shut. I ran to the windows, but the landscape outside had changed. The forest had crept closer. The sky was black, though it was only midday. Shadows flitted past the glass, but nothing ever stood still long enough to see. I turned and caught my own reflection in the hallway mirror, but something was wrong. My reflection was smiling. I wasn't. That mirror shattered the moment I touched it, and from the shards I saw myself again, and again, and again. Each fragment showed me slightly different, older, hollow-eyed, blood-smeared. I stumbled into what I can only call the mirror room, a chamber filled wall to wall with glass. Each mirror held a version of me, distorted in time and mood, but one of them moved, not a reflection. It turned and stared back, blinking independently. Then it stepped out of the mirror, slowly, unnaturally. It smiled wider than a human should, and whispered, "I've been waiting so long to wear you again." I fled, slamming the door behind me, but I could still hear it laughing, my own laugh, twisted and wrong. That night, every mirror in the house turned black, no reflection, just darkness. I caught movement from the corner of my eye, everywhere I went, and once, as I turned a hallway corner, I saw myself, my exact double, staring at me from the other end. Same clothes, same wound on the cheek. It didn't move. It didn't blink. I shut the door between us, but deep down I feared the truth. The house wanted to replace me. Desperate, I ventured back into town. It was dawn, or at least I thought it was. The fog was so thick, I could barely see a few feet ahead. When I reached Dartmouth, I realized nothing was right. The streets were too quiet. The buildings looked older, faded, as if time had peeled everything away. The townsfolk watched me from windows, but didn't speak. At the church, I begged the old pastor for help. He closed the door in my face. A young woman whispered to me from behind a shop, "You should never have gone back. You're the last. Let the house keep you." I pressed her, demanded answers. She said her grandmother once served the Ashfords. The town had made a pact generations ago. Stay out of the woods, bury the history, and the darkness would remain in the house. In return, the Ashfords would not walk beyond their land. But when the last Ashford child died, the ritual broke. They needed new blood. That's when the letter was sent to me. The town knew, and no one tried to stop it. She said if I returned, the house would consume me, erase me from the world, and wear my face for the next century. I fled back to the estate in a fury, intent on burning it to the ground, but when I returned, the house was waiting, lit from within, warm, inviting. The gates had closed on their own. I should have left then, but some part of me had already begun to change. I walked through the front door, not as a victim, but as something returning. I felt it in my bones. The blood of the Ashfords was mine, and the house knew it. The house welcomed it. I wasn't just part of the story. I was the final chapter. The house didn't fight me anymore. It opened for me, revealed its secrets freely. The nursery door creaked open without touch. The ledgers reorganized themselves, names glowing faintly in the candlelight. I found hidden rooms I hadn't seen before, rooms full of portraits, rooms full of preserved clothing, even a gallery of bones labeled and stored with care. The woman in the walls now stood beside me in mirrors. The children followed me through corridors, like obedient phantoms. I wasn't afraid anymore. I should have been, but I wasn't. Something was shifting inside me. I began to speak the words from the ritual book aloud. They no longer sounded foreign. My mouth knew the shapes. My dreams stopped. Instead, I began to remember things, memories that weren't mine. The voice of my father chanting in the cellar, the sting of the blade during the blood rite, the laughter of the other children before they were taken. I knew then that the Ashfords didn't die out. They had simply moved inward into the house itself, into the walls, into the blood, into me. I stared at my reflection again. My eyes were darker, my skin paler, my voice echoed strangely. I realized I wasn't just part of the family tree. I was its root, reborn. The house didn't trap me. It brought me home. And outside, the forest began to move again. The town would forget me soon. I would be another face in the portrait, another whisper in the nursery. The cycle had begun again, and I was ready. I write this not as a warning, but as a confession to those who find this journal. If it even survives the years to come, know that there is no saving me. I am Ashford now. The house sings to me. It tells me who will come next. I know their names. I know when they'll arrive, and when they do, I will greet them at the gate, just like the others did before me. The blood will be spilled. The rites will be kept. Sometimes I still hear my old voice echoing through the halls, begging to leave, but it's buried now, beneath layers of history and hunger. The children dance in the nursery again. The woman walks freely, finally seen, and the mirrors smile for me. I sit in the study where it all began. The ledger open beside me, ready for a new name to be added. The house is breathing. Its walls pulse with life, with memory, with us. If you come looking for the Ashfords, be careful. Some houses don't want to be found. Others, they find you. And once you step inside, you'll understand it never lets go. It simply becomes you.